Welcome. Good morning, Encounter. It's good to have you here this morning. It's good to see you. Our early service. We are in this series, as you probably picked up from that video, entitled Be the Difference. And this series is a 3-week series that takes us through what is Encounter Community Church all about. Why do we do church? And so we tried to convey that over the last three weeks, today finishing up, and then next week we kick off our fall series called Heaven. I know that a lot of us are excited about that, and you can sign up for the life groups back there. We have the life group booklet. Make sure you check that out. We kick that off next week. I'm looking forward to that. But before we get there, we need to stop and pause a little bit and talk about what Encounter Community Church is all about. Why do we do church? Why did God call us as a faith community to be here in Belding? And so that's what I want to share today, once again our purpose, our mission and vision, and how we pull off our mission and vision. And now here's something I want to say to you, just to kind of get us back onto this conversation that we've been having over the last several weeks, is that every organization, whether it's a faith-based organization, nonprofit or for-profit, every organization exists for something, for a purpose. And with that purpose, they have a mission. And each organization has to decide what that is. And for faith-based organizations, such as a church, we feel led by God and directed by His Spirit in leading us what that particular vision and mission is, that uniqueness for our organization here at Encounter. Every church has to face that. Every organization really has to figure out why they exist. And when it becomes a faith-based Christian organization, you have to really lean into the Spirit. So every church in our city, every church in our county, if you will, needs to wrestle with that. It's their responsibility to figure out, as a leadership and a congregation, to say, okay, every church is on the same mission, and that overall arching mission is to bring people into a relationship with Jesus Christ. We're on the same team with that. How that is expressed is going to be unique and different for each church in our community. And so Encounter's flavor or gifting in that is going to be different than the Baptist church or the non-denominational church or the congregational church or the Methodist church. Any other churches, it's going to be different. And so we need to zero in on that. That's why maybe we've had people come here at Encounter and they love it. And we have some people that come here and it just doesn't resonate with them, and that's okay, because that may not be their flavor. But there may be somewhere else they can serve, and that's awesome. We want that. We're on the same team, we just have different expressions. And so every year here at Encounter, we want to dial in, remind ourselves what God has called us to be as a church, as a faith-based community here in Belding, Michigan, and in Ionia County as well. And so that's what we've been doing the last couple weeks, is just saying, hey, this is what we're about. And part of doing and living out and being focused on our mission and vision and being intentional on this, there's a reason why we talk about this every year. There's a reason why throughout the year we'll bring back, remind us, hey, this is what we're doing. This is the point of why we're here. We do this because we need to be focused. We need to be centered on this. We need to make sure that we're doing what God's calling us to do. Because here's the thing, as I've been talking about the last couple of weeks, we change, people change, and because the church is made up of people, what God does in that change is modify and tweak and pivot our vision and mission as we continue to grow. Because we develop more gifts and He wants us to be more focused, or He's calling us out to do even more, and for each and one of us to play a significant part. And so that's why we take time every year to do a series like this to say, okay, this is what Encounter Community Church is about. Let's remind ourselves, let's refresh it, the refresh or reset button, and say this is what we're about. But also, I always do this because God's calling us into even more, because we're growing as a church. And so that's what this series was all about, that we're going to be the difference and make a difference. We need to be the difference because God calls us to play a significant part. Now, one of the things that I talked about in this series is proposed this question. I proposed this question last year because it's a very thought-provoking question. It gets us to really think about our point and focus us on our mission and vision. and our purpose. And the question goes like this, is if Encounter Community Church was to cease to exist, would we be missed? That's a challenging question, isn't it? It makes us think individually and collectively, what is my part in this? What is my gifting a part of this expression that God has called Encounter Community Church to be in the community here in Belding? If we were to shut our doors, would we have made any impact? And I think that question needs to be asked every year, because it pushes us to say, God, we need to lean into you. We need to trust you, because we need to make sure we're staying focused on what you've called us to be as a church. And so what has God called us to be as a church here at Encounter Community Church? What is our purpose? And with that purpose, our vision and mission. See, our purpose, as I've been sharing out throughout this series, our purpose has always been, when we started over 10 years ago, is essentially this, that our purpose, what we are about, is to reach the unindeed church in our community. We are a church that is called to reach the unindeed church in our community. We will never deviate from that. See, all the churches in our city, all the churches in our county are all called to bring people into relationship with Jesus Christ, the unchurched. I think everybody can get on board with that. But what we specifically want to do is take it a step further, not just the unchurched, but the de-churched. And the de-churched is those individuals who, for some reason, whatever happened, they were turned off by faith. Something in their faith experience turned them away from God. Something happened. But here's the thing. I believe once you interact and taste God, and he will continue the good work he started in you, that's what Paul says in Philippians, that there's still going to be an openness. And since we value that and we believe that, and that's going to be our purpose, we always want to be on track of that, to reach the unindeed church. We want to bring the de-church back into that relationship with Jesus Christ and always reach the unchurched. That's our purpose. That's why we came together as a group of people back in 2007. I wasn't a part of that. I came 2 years after the fact. But I love that. That's what we need to be. And we will always be that. We're not about reaching the church people. They are welcome to be a part. Or church hoppers, they're welcome to be a part. But when they come in, this is what we will tell them. We said, this is our purpose, to reach the unindeed church. You can come on board with that. If that's something that doesn't resonate with you, we got a lot of other faith communities and churches in our area that may fit what you're about. But this is what we're going to be about. That's our purpose. Now, with our purpose, we need to always make sure we keep that. That's our unique expression as a church. We will always keep that. So there's this question that I've been trying to convey over the last 2 weeks to say, okay, Rob, that's our purpose, but what is it about that purpose that we're going to be able to convey? What are we conveying to the unindeed church? Or not only the what, but the why. Why are we doing it? And so I've shared this, is that and for us to reach the unindeed church with what? What is it that we're going to reach them with? Well, we hark back to what Jesus said in the Gospel of Luke 4:18 and 19, as we showed in the video. And basically what Jesus said is that this is what Jesus came to do. He essentially says, I have come to heal the brokenhearted and set the captives free. And what we've translated that into our mission and vision statement, the what are we going to reach the unindeed church with? We believe that we're going to reach the unindeed church with this simple mission and vision statement. We believe that their hearts need to be healed and their lives need to be restored. And we broke it down just basically healing hearts and restoring lives. That's the what. How we're going to reach the unindeed church, our purpose, we believe that we're going to reach them by operating out of giving them opportunities for their hearts to be healed, because we believe this, that every person in the world has some level of brokenness, and the only answer for that is Jesus Christ. And we believe not only is their hearts broken, they can find healing, but their lives and the ramifications of a broken heart, God wants to restore their lives as well. And that's why Jesus came. And so that's our unique expression, the what? Our purpose to reach the unindeed church. And we're going to do that by healing their hearts and restoring their lives. And so what we've been talking about in this series is this part of the equation. Well, how are you going to do that then, Rob? How are you going to go about healing their hearts and restoring their lives? And what we've been talking about in this series is what we refer to as values. Values that we hold dear. Values that we believe that these are the things. If we live these values out, not only are we going to experience God's healing and restoration, but we're going to be able to, out of that relationship with God and each other, we're going to be able to demonstrate that to the unending church in our community. And so I've went over these values, and these values came out of a book in the New Testament called Acts. And before I get there, I want to just remind us of these values, these beliefs. These are guardrails. These are the lane that we're going to be able to express our unique expression, our unique flavor to those that need to hear Jesus' message of hope. And so our values are simply this: honest communication, relational discipleship, which means teaching people how to walk with God, intentional positivity, humility, joyful fun, and over-the-top generosity. And those two are where we're going to camp out today as we wrap up the series, Be the Difference. Joyful fun, over-the-top generosity. And as I mentioned throughout this series, we believe that these 6 values come from a book in the New Testament, the 5th book in the New Testament called the Book of Acts. And in this book is the book of Acts talks about the starting of the church, how the church started. Specifically in chapter 2 near the end, it talks about the fundamentals of what a church needs to be. That if a church gets sideways or gets off track, if you will, come back to these fundamentals. And we see these values, these 6 values, demonstrated in the early church, especially in verses 44 through 47 in Acts chapter 2. And I just want to read this as a reminder. It says this, that all the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need, over-the-top generosity. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts, relational discipleship. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts. Intentional positivity, joyful fun, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. See, they were reaching the unchurched. They were reaching the de-churched. And they had values. And so for us to reach our purpose and fulfill our mission, we're going to do and live out these 6 values. Now, I want to say something before we jump into the last 2 values. Each week we've been looking at 2 of the values, and we're going to look at joyful fun, and then we're going to look at over-the-top generosity. But this morning I came in and I prepped and I did what I needed to do, and what I usually do on Sunday is I'm probably out of here about 8:15, and I have a couple prayer spots that I go. I'm an active person, okay? I can't sit still. Just that's something you need to know about me. Some of you who know me, that's like, okay, I cannot sit still. My daughter takes after me. And so I like to go for prayer walks. I need to move. I need to be in God's creation, whether it's a river trail or something. I need to be moving. And so this morning I went to one of my favorite spots, and I'm just walking, and I just felt this weightiness on my soul. And I started thinking about our values, honest communication. And I just felt like this week I talked with some of you this week. You ever have one of those weeks, just challenging weeks? This week was one of those weeks for me. Just seemed like I couldn't get a rhythm during the week. And as I got out and started to walk with God, I just communicated and just poured out my heart. And in that time doing that, I don't know if you feel this way, but sometimes in those moments when you have weeks like I did this week, sometimes you just don't feel like, at least this is how I feel at times, and it opens me up to allow God to speak in. I just don't feel like I'm his guy. I feel like at times it creeps in that, God, you need to pick somebody else. man, I screwed this up this week. I snapped at my daughter or my son. I should have handled that conversation better with my wife. And it's always interesting how the enemy gets in there and just like, yeah, you did screw up. And you call yourself a Christian. Or in my case, you call yourself a pastor. And in those moments when you're kind of just spinning out of control in that, God speaks in that moment because He's a God who's honest. He's a God who pursues us relationally. He's a God who wants to bring life. And what I felt this morning, and just kind of sets the tone of why church is so important, and coming together and something collective like this, is that I know I have those flaws. I know I have those imperfections. I know I have those blemishes. I know I have those insecurities, all that. But God still chose me. He still chooses you. And as long as we bring that to Him in this humble place, saying, God, I don't even know why. God's not even concerned with that. What He wants is your heart, and you just give that over to Him. And so that's why we value these values, because they push us. They push us to say, I'm not going to believe that. I'm going to stay focused. I'm going to stay connected to Him. And when you have values like that we've been talking about, they help you stay on track. They help you open yourself up to others that you trust who can speak a life into you, and open yourself up to God. And then you can experience what we're going to talk about this morning, joyful fun. And out of that joyful fun, that joyness you get with your faith community and God, you're going to want to be generous. So let's look at this idea of joyful fun this morning as we wrap up this series, Be the Difference. Now, I was thinking about this idea of joyful fun, and there are so many verses I could have chose. And the verse that I chose this morning, I think some of you are going to be like, what on earth were you thinking with this one? And I will explain that. So on the surface, this seems like so far away from joyful fun, but as you see why I felt that this was important, I hope it makes sense to you. The verse that I used this morning just stuck out to me. It comes from a book in the New Testament called 1 Corinthians. The books of Corinthians were letters that Paul wrote. Paul was a guy who wrote much of the New Testament, a guy who started a lot of different churches in the Mediterranean Rim during 1st century A.D. And Paul started this church in the city called Corinth. And Corinth was kind of like a metropolitan city, if you will. There was a lot of commerce. It was a port city. There was a lot going on here. And so there was a lot of different philosophy, religious attitudes, thoughts. There was a lot of different ideas on morality. I think it's very similar, or a picture of our world and culture today. And so what was happening in this Corinthian church is that they were changing, but they were still hanging on to things from the culture and world around them. And what prevented them from changing quickly was this thing that prevents us at times. Can you guys listen closely? Come here. This thing called pride. Hello? Yeah. Okay. And so I chose this because of that. And let me give you the context, what was going on here in these verses 6, 7, and 8. Just 3 verses, but the context behind this. See, Paul was addressing a sin issue that was happening in the Corinthian church. And the sin issue was this, that there was this guy who, from what I understand, had lost his wife. She either passed away or something. And so he remarried. In that culture, when an older guy, loses his wife and then remarries, he usually marries somebody younger. Does that seem a shock to you at all? Okay? But married somebody younger. Well, what happened is this guy had a son, and the son thought this gal was attractive, and he had an affair with her, his stepmom. And this wasn't a good thing. And so the church wasn't dealing with this. Now you can understand kind of this younger girl is near the same age as this guy's son. And so what happened is that Paul wanted the church to address it, and they wouldn't address it because for whatever reason, they didn't think it was a big deal, or they had other things to deal with. And remember, they're influenced by the world and culture around them. And so Paul comes at them, wanting them to deal with this. And what I want you to understand when I read this is what is preventing them from dealing with the situation? Because I think what happens is it prevents us from dealing with the situation, whatever that is in our lives. And when we don't deal with it, guess what we miss out on? God's joy. Hello? So let's listen to this verse, starting in verse 6. And Paul tells it right out of the gate why they weren't dealing with this. He says this, your boasting is not good. I'm going to pause there. Pride. Pride prevents us from dealing with situations in our life. Well, it's not a big deal, or we justify whatever reasons. And when that happens, guess what? It spoils the rest of the people around us. It can spoil our faith journey if we allow pride to continue to fuel us. And that's exactly what Paul says after that statement. He says, don't you know that a little yeast leavens the whole batch of dough, spoils the whole dough? Get rid of the old yeast so that you may be a new unleavened batch, as you really are. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Look what Jesus, you have this relationship available with Jesus Christ. Verse 8, therefore, let us keep the festival, not with the old bread leavened with malice and wickedness, but with unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. What Paul is saying there is when we allow pride to fuel us, we're not going to live with sincerity and truth. We're going to live with malice and wickedness. And it's going to spoil us and those around us. And that's exactly what was happening with the Corinthian church. This one sin thing where people were not, no, it's not a big deal. This is not there's other things we got to deal with. It was a big deal. And that's something that we say at times in our faith journey. This isn't a big deal, God, when it is a big deal. And what that thing does in us is it takes away the joy that God has for us. But pride prevents that. Here's what I know about pride. Most of the time we wrestle with pride because we are insecure. Hello? Did you ever hear about that? Ever think about that? Insecurity? And we don't think we're good enough, and so we try to be something we're not. We try to put on this mask. We hide our blemishes. We hide our flaws. We hide our imperfections, and so we try to look a certain part, be a certain way because we're insecure. And guess what? There's no joy in that. Some of the most difficult people I've interacted with in ministry are people that have insecurity, and they don't want to deal with that. And what happens is it spoils the rest of the people because they're trying to be something they're not. And if people don't line up with them, man, they'll lambaste them. And I know we have family members like that. It steals joy. And it prevents intentional positivity we talked about last week. Things become negative. We don't experience humility because pride's fueling that. And that's exactly what Paul is saying. Joyful fun can be obtained if we die to self and open up to the relationship with God. A biblical definition of joy is this. Joy is a state of mind and orientation of the heart. It is a settled state of contentment, confidence, and hope. Just imagine for a moment if you could live in that contentment, confidence, and hope. In who? Not your abilities, but your identity in Jesus Christ. Too many times our pride gets fueled by our insecurities or our shame or our guilt. Where we need to, as I was sharing this morning, I just need to give that over to God. There's some times when I will keep score with my wife. I'm sure none of you have ever done this with your spouse, okay? Don't look at me that way. And when I do that, guess what the fuel of doing that is? Pride, boasting. But what I need to do is die to self, trust that if I feel like I'm being slighted or if my needs aren't being met, guess who meets my needs? God. Do I believe that? And when I start looking to Him, guess what He fills me up with? Joy. Hello? That fuels me instead of pride. And in what pride, and that insecurity, and that shame, and guilt. I want to live with contentment, confidence, and hope in Jesus Christ. And out of that relationship, interact with others. And I can live in joy. And out of that, people can experience God's joy by me walking in it. First and foremost, my family. And then my church family and those that God brings into my life that I interact with. Are you with me? See, joyful fun is something I feel is a value here at Encounter because it's something I believe that we're good at. We love having fun. And just think of those moments when we can be lighthearted and enjoy each other's company. Man, it just seems like there's life being poured into us because I tell you, in our culture and our world, it seems like life is being sucked out of us at times because culture is trying to say you need to be this, you need to be that, and it hammers its image into you. In fact, Webster's definition of fun puts it this way: fun is an enjoyment, amusement, or a light-hearted pleasure. Man, we need to have more joy in our life. And when we start to be intentional on that, guess what happens? We enjoy each other's company, we have fun. I believe that's what the early church was experiencing. Joy can last even in the midst, as Darren prayed this morning for us, in the difficult times, because we have perspective. That's what God wants to give us. And we're going to value joyful fun here. Not fake joy, but we're going to understand that joy is something that if we can let go of what we think is going to be, or what we believe that if we have to act a certain way and we can let that go and surrender to Jesus Christ and take on His identity, man, we're going to experience more and more joy in our life, even in the midst of difficult situations and circumstances. Our last value that I want to talk about that helps us fulfill our mission and vision to heal hearts and restore lives is over-the-top generosity. Now here's the thing. I could have said generosity, and that's great, but I want to be over the top. You want to know why I want to be over the top generous? Because God the Father was over the top generous by sending His Son, Jesus Christ. Hello? He's my example. He's our example. I want to be that way. Am I good at that? No. Do I need still more work in that? Yes. Am I a work in progress in that? Yes. But that's my goal. And I want to set that. I want to be that. I want to value that as a part of my personal life and our personal lives here at Encounter Community Church so we can be an example to the unending church in our world. Because I can tell you what, right now, most people in our culture, in our world, when they think of the church, I don't think they think generous, do they? I don't know why that is. Maybe there's some reasons for that, but you want to know what? All we can do is do what God calls us to do and value that, and that's what we're going to do here at Encounter Community Church. We're going to value generosity. One of the verses that brings that idea back to mind is one of my favorite verses is in the New Testament, 1 John 3:16 through 18. It says this: we know what real love is because Jesus gave up His life for us. So real love is sacrificing, giving up something for others. And so what the author is saying here is that you want to experience real love, this is what it looks like. So we also ought to give up our lives for our brothers and sisters. Well, how do we do that? If someone has enough money to live well and sees a brother or sister in need but shows no compassion, how can God's love be in that person? Dear children, let us not merely say that we love each other. Let us show the truth by our actions. We can talk a big game, but what does our actions speak? Our actions need to speak compassion. In fact, commentaries that on this particular verse, and what commentaries are is a bunch of smart guys who break down particular verses and then they write it, and then you as somebody who follows Jesus or is studying God's Word, you like to take these and see what they're saying about this. And this is what commentaries say on this particular verses in 1 John. How clearly do your actions say you really love others? Are we as generous as we should be? And how are we going to be generous, they say? With our money? Okay, get that. But it goes on to say our possessions and our time. That's what generosity looks like. See, we always camp out on money. And I think the reason why we camp out money because a lot of us camp out there because that's where we get our value from. We put more of our security in money than in Jesus Christ at times. We may not say that, but our actions demonstrate that. I know that hit close to home, but it's a reality. We're a product of our culture. And see, God wants to come in and change that. And how He's going to change that is by generosity, being over the top as a value, as a belief system. not only with just money, but our possessions and time. I think one example of this that will help us, I mentioned this last week in my message, is the story of the rich young ruler. And here's what was happening, is that Jesus was having this interaction with this rich young guy. He had some type of authority, and Jesus liked this guy. There was something about this guy that Jesus really liked. And so he had this conversation with this guy. In fact, this guy asked Jesus a question. He was a wealthy young man, as I said, and asked Jesus this question. What must I do, basically what he's saying, to inherit eternal life? And Jesus said, be obedient. Follow these rules. These certain rules. Do that. Let that become a part of it. Let these become values. And the guy says, well, I've done that. And then Jesus responds to him with something else. I want to just come into this conversation. And so I'm picking this up in Matthew 19, 20 through 22, where Jesus is asking the guy, telling the guy all these things that he needs to do, and this man responds this way in verse 20. The young man said to him, all these things I have kept, all these rules, all these values I've kept, and what am I still lacking? There's something in him he wants more. He wants more of Jesus. What else must I do? What else is there that I can do? And Jesus said to him, if you wish to be complete, go and sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. And come, follow me. But when the young man heard this statement, he went away grieving, for he was one who owned much property. Here's the interesting thing, is that this guy had all this money, all his possessions. And he had this heart for Jesus. And then Jesus said, are you willing to give up this? Because what was happening is all this money, this possessions, was his security blanket. He was holding on to it. This will keep me safe. And Jesus said, if you really want to follow me, are you willing to give this over to me and follow me? Now, here's something you need to understand about this idea when Jesus calls somebody to follow them. In that culture, in that time frame, most people, the majority of people, lived their entire existence pretty much in a 35-mile radius of where they were born. Never went outside that. They just lived their entire life that way. But see, when Jesus called his disciples, who most of them were fishermen, tax collector, and a few other unique characters, they've seen the whole entire world. They went to places they never thought they would. They were becoming, and they did things they never even thought or imagined by simply sacrificing, trusting Jesus, and going and doing things. Whether it was things locally or globally, they did things that they never thought they would. And Jesus was asking this rich young ruler, I know that you have all this stuff here, and this keeps you local and keeps you right here, and you have it all. But if you give this up to me and follow me, trust, sacrifice, and be generous, man, you're going to see and experience things you never even thought or imagined. And here's the catch in this. When we think about the story of the rich young ruler, when it came to that, he lived a calculated, protected life. And we never hear about him again, do we? But we hear plenty about the disciples. In fact, probably most churches on a Sunday are talking about something about the disciples and their journey and their interaction with Jesus and their writings. See, the rich young ruler could have done more, but he was unwilling to give up and be generous. And so many of us, the reason why we can't be generous is because we're building our kingdom instead of his kingdom. And then when we do that, guess what happens? We're not going to experience that full joy. We're not going to experience that life until Jesus is in that place. When it comes to our money, our possessions, and our time. And that's why here at Encounter we want to value this, because I know that this is something that can derail one's faith journey. Money can quickly derail. And then just all the other values just fall off from there, because pride or whatever sets in. So here's something that we want to be intentional in this. And I want to show you why we value this at Encounter, why this is important to us. See, Encounter, we budget everything based on this principle. And the principle is, we call it the 10-10-80, that we give 10% of our annually giving to our denomination and the things and the works that they do that we value. We give another 10% of our annual income to church planting because we were planted, and so we give to Greenhouse Church Planting Network, which we're a part of, which helped us start. And then the rest, we live on that. And even in that 80%, we take some of that and give to our community and baby pantry and all these things. Most churches don't live on that. But see, I can't speak to all those churches because what I said earlier is that this is our expression. This is our flavor. This is who we are. This is what God has called us to be. And so we value over-the-top generosity in the fact that how we budget and set aside our money. Because we want to live that way. And because of that, last Sunday, one of our church plants launched their first service, The Mix, in Lansing, Michigan, and had over 100 people attend in Old Town Lansing. Luis Torres, who came and spoke here over a year and a half ago. And it's because we were generous. We take our resources along with some of our other sister churches, and we're able to plant the church. Next Sunday in Goose Creek, South Carolina, the Oaks Church, Pastor Nicole Franklin is going to be opening her doors with her first official launch. You know what? We helped in that. In fact, 3 weeks ago, her contractor, who was supposed to finish the project, took money and ran, and she was kind of left, and they didn't know what they were going to do. And she reached out for us in prayer, and we asked her how much it was, and she told us the amount. And as a collective network, we said, you know what? Here it is. We're with you. We value over-the-top generosity. We have churches starting in Swaziland, Africa, that you probably didn't know that. 10% of what we get, we go to church planting. This is part of that. We have 6 churches in Swaziland, Africa, that are reaching people with the gospel message. And some of you are saying, well, Rob, that's great regionally, nationally, and globally. But what about me? What about locally? What about here in Belding? Well, let me tell you, we do that too. This year, the Gus Macker asked us to help serve. Didn't ask for money, because remember I said those money, possessions, time. They just asked our time, because that's being over the top generous too. And because of that, we were able to serve Macker Weekend for the 45th anniversary, and we had a lot of people just help and serve and meet needs. Also, that same weekend, we gave out 1,100 bottles of water and cookies to the people that were coming into Belding and our Belding community, because we wanted people to know that, hey, you're coming into Belding, we value Belding, this is a cool town, this is a cool city, and we want to love on you. And we were able to do that, over-the-top generosity. Last year, our life groups, during the end of our fall life groups, every life group decided to do a project, a serving project. Some of the life groups were able to sing at some of the adult foster care homes and do music at various adult foster care homes in our county. We had other life groups help some families in needs by giving them toys because they just didn't have that. And 2 other life groups, my life group and another life group, we helped at the annual Christmas Eve dinner for those that are less fortunate. We teamed up with a congregational church because it's not about us. It's about a community, and we were able to serve that and be over-the-top generous with our possessions, money, and time. We bought groceries for families in need, as well as those who have special felt needs. We paid for gas bills for people, help with those that need electrical issues, and we also vet and understand that there's some people trying to take advantage. But since we are intentional about being over the top generous, just because people are trying to take advantage of us, we don't say, well, I guess we can't do that. We still want to do and be generous. And when you're trying to do that, you're going to be intentional, and you're going to do a good job of vetting as best as you can, because that's your value. We have the baby pantry that we've been doing for years, and we've reached hundreds of families. And that's something that's extra. It's not like we get a government check for that. We do that because we value over-the-top generosity. And last year, guess what we did? We went into our local prison and started a campus, which wasn't easy to do. We started that, and now every Sunday we have a church service going on in Bellamy Creek Prison, and hundreds of men are coming to a relationship with Jesus Christ and being baptized. In fact, last week, 21 men were baptized during Sunday morning service. See, we value over-the-top generosity. We value joyful fun because we want to live it. And if we're going to be a church that makes an impact and reach the unneedy church in our community with the message of healing hearts and restoring lives, then we got to value these 6 ways to doing this. See, we're going to be a church that's honest in our communication, helps people understand how to walk with God, relational discipleship. We are going to value intentional positivity, humility, joyful fun, and over-the-top generosity. That's our value. One of the things I wanted to mention as I close is last year we had a capital campaign to reduce our debt, and the reason why we want to do that, and we did that last year so we could be more generous by paying down our debt. And we had cards that looked like this. And if you weren't aware of that and you want to be a part of it, you can always go online, go to the giving, and there's on the giving page you can see how you can give towards our building and reduce our debt. Well, I just found out this week that last year from our capital campaign that we kicked off, we started the campaign last year at this time. We had a month where people could sign up. And what we had pledged to reduce our debt was about $60,000 that was pledged over the next 3 years. Well, our financial person told us that as of this week, we have paid off $20,000 of our debt, nearly $20,000 of our debt. Why do I share that? So we can pat ourselves on the back? No, I share that because we want to be a church that can be over the top generous. So we can set the tone for others. This is what we want to be, because here is one of the things that I value and I believe. Is that, man, if we can get to this place of living out these values, especially joyful fun and over-top generosity, which is what we're talking about today, if we can value that, man, I know a pastor in our community, their church has been kind of going through a roller coaster, and we talk often, and I love his heart. Man, if we could get to a place where we're such a generous community here and we believe in giving, man, I would love to just go up to him and give him a check and say, hey, we value what you do. Here's $3,000. We want to help you. Or our local Christian school to be able to do that. Or any other need that we can be able to respond to it. That's over-the-top generosity, and that's why we value it. I don't want to just play church. I want to be the church. Do you want to be the church? This is Encounter Community Church's unique expression. That's how we're going to reach a culture. When we value these things, when we're honest with each other, when we can walk with each other and teach each other about God, when we can be intentionally positive, when it's so easy to be negative, when pride creeps in, we're just going to take a humble posture and attitude. We can have fun and experience God's joy and be over the top generous. That is who we are, Encounter. And we can reach the lost with that. Will you bow your heads and close your eyes as the worship team comes forward? I want to pray, and I want to give you an opportunity to respond through communion this morning. We're wrapping up this series, and so we want to respond with communion. And I want to pray for you. Every week we give opportunities for people to come up for prayer, whether it's during worship, where they need to spend some time with God, or come up and have prayer with some of our prayer partners up here. But this week we're going to do something a little different. We're going to respond with communion. So if there's something in this series to be the difference, and God is calling you to be the difference, I just ask that during this last worship song that you invite God into that place that He's raising up. He's asking you to take a step to just give that over to Him. And after you deal with that and give that over to Him, I want you just to come up and respond to communion as you normally would. Because communion is a picture. It's a reminder of what Jesus did for us. He sacrificed for you and me. His body was beat up. His blood was shed so we could be in right standing with God the Father. And he did that because he loved you, because he was generous. And he wants you to experience life and life to the full. So, Father, we just invite you here as we partake of communion. I pray that before we come up, we'll just take a moment, center ourselves with you. Maybe recommit some things, recommit some of these values. Remind ourselves of what Encounter Community Church is about, that we are going to be a church that reaches the unending church by healing hearts and restoring lives. Lord, what is our part in that? I pray you work in the hearts of those here. Father, we thank you for being here already. I pray that you just carry us on as we wrap up today's service and respond with communion. We ask this in your name we pray. Amen.